Hello everyone, so today I'm here to do my Read Around the World challenge video for Southern Africa. So that is a lot of countries. It includes Angola, Namibia, Zambia, Zimbabwe, Botswana, Malawi, Mozambique, Eswatini, Lesotho, South Africa, Madagascar, Comoros, Seychelles and Mauritius. A lot of countries, I know, but I just didn't know how to divide them otherwise, so I'm just going to do all of them in this video and I hope you enjoy. So the first country I wanted to talk about is Angola, and for Angola I have read A General Theory of Oblivion by José Eduardo Aguilusa, and I actually have a full review of it, so I will link it down below. But basically, so Angola went through some political unrest and a coup and all of that, and we followed this woman that locked herself into her apartment for I think 20-25 years during that time, so she kind of got glimpses of what was happening outside, but she was really not participating because she was just in her apartment willingly for reasons for her own reasons. And she is a very lovable character in some ways, even though she's somewhat frustrating, and it's an interesting way of presenting the story. I think there is also a personal story going on with her and why she's in the place that she is. But there is a lot of elements to it, and there is an interesting point of view, I think. So I did enjoy the book for that. However, I think that something didn't just click with me. I think it was more of a me thing than the book is bad thing. But yeah, I liked it. I didn't love it. The next book I read was for Namibia, and for that I read The Purple Violet of Oshantu by Neshani Andreas. And this book is about mainly two women in a village in Namibia, and one of them has a very good life. Her husband is very nice to her, never abusive, and even though in the cultural aspects of the town or the village, a husband beating his wife is almost expected and almost frowned upon if it doesn't happen, but this husband refuses to beat his wife, and he's just really nice, and she has a good life. She has no big problems, and then her best friend is the opposite. Her husband was a horrible man. He beat her really bad. He was abusive. He was cheating on her. He spent his money on stuff, and it's a very bad relationship. And then one day they find this man is dead, and he died at home. Nobody knows what happened. Nobody knows why he died, and the book starts at that point, and we kind of follow like what happens to this woman when she some people think that she killed him, but that's never proven. And then there is also the other aspect that she refuses to mourn for him because he was so horrible to her, and she doesn't want to give that satisfaction to other people, I guess. And then, of course, his family is not okay with that, and there is also a lot of cultural elements going into who gets the inheritance and how does that work. So there's a lot of culture in it, and there is a lot of interesting things to look for, and I enjoyed the story, and I wanted to know what happened because of all of the elements that were happening. I think the plot was well constructed as well, but the writing was nothing too special for me. I think it was fine. It did its job, but it was not something that was a beautifully written or something. But overall, I think I enjoyed the book for what it was. Then for Zambia, I read two books. The first one is The Old Drift by Namwali Serpell, and this book was a ride. There's a lot of very interesting things in it, and I really enjoy it. It's a kind of a multi-generational story about several families that kind of get mixed together, and it goes from the past when Zambia got independence until actually the future. So it's also a sci-fi book at the end, which I was not expecting, and it was just like so much to take on. But yeah, overall I think it was very well done, and I think it's worth a read. just be aware that the end is a little bit wild, because it turns into from historical fiction to a sci-fi. So yes, that's the old drift. And the other one that I have read from Zambia is non-fiction book called Dead Ed by Dambisa Moyo. It's quite dense and quite academic, and it kind of goes into why the current way that we try to aid Africa doesn't really work, and it's actually more detrimental than anything else. It goes into a lot of economical reasons and stuff, and I think that it has its value, even though maybe I didn't agree with all the perspectives, because the author she was educated in the Chicago school, so I believe it's like really into capitalism, and it's like this book is written from a very capitalistic point of view, so that doesn't always gel with me, but some of the points that she makes, and because we do live under capitalism, I think it's still interesting to read. For Zimbabwe, I have read several books. The ones I want to highlight are the Nervous Condition Trilogy, which I love, and I have a full review of the 3 books in my channel, so I will link that down below. But I will highly recommend to read those books, and I know that at the beginning they are a little bit harder to get through, but they are worth by the end, in my opinion. And then the other big one that has been everywhere lately that I have read is Glory by NoViolet Bulawayo. I also read her first book, We Need New Names. And We Need New Names is a more normal book, I will say. Like, it's about these kids that grow in Zimbabwe poor, and then we kind of see where they get out into life. And I thought that was fine. And then Glory is a lot wilder as a book. It's about the coup that happened in, I think, 2017 in Zimbabwe, or around there, when Mugabe was taken out of power, but it's written in an imaginary country, and all the people are animals. So there are horses, and there are pigs, and there are like all kinds of animals, and I think that, I mean, the writing style is very reminiscent of oral tradition, and it's very effective. I think it's really special, and it makes you, if you get into the rhythm, it makes you more at one with the book. But the animal thing, I just couldn't get behind, and I know that the animal aspect of this book is one of those things that you either hate or love. I know that people love it because they think it makes sense within the fable kind of environment that this book is told in. Personally, I just couldn't get over the fact that horses were tweeting, and that made zero sense to me, and it just, like, for me, there was no need to do that. The book had a lot more power, I think, if we didn't do that, but the author decided to do that. And for me, like, I did love aspects of the book, but I couldn't love the book as a whole because of the animal thing. And that's one of those things that it either works or doesn't work for you, and unfortunately it didn't work for me. The next one I read for Botswana, and it's A Question of Power by Bessie Head, and this is about a boarding school and some people in that boarding school, some of which were the kids, the professors, white, black. There is a lot of mix in between, and it's I notice a lot of these books are mentioning the apartheid in South Africa, which makes sense because they are all kind of around South Africa, and that was a very big thing going on in that region. So this is one of the ones that's mentioned it, not because it happened in Botswana, but because it was so close to them that there was consequences for them also, even though they didn't have it. So there is a lot of racial politics in this book, and the language is really, really good. Like, I think it was really well written. But I think I would like to read something more from this author, because the story in this one just didn't grab me. But I recognize that the writing was really good. So I think looking into more books from Bessie Head will be a good way to go. For Malawi, I read The Boy Who Harnessed the Wind by William Komkwamba. And this is a non-fiction book, kind of memoir type of thing. And the author, basically, when he was young, he lived in a very small village in Malawi that was going through a really bad drought, and his family was really poor, so sometimes they couldn't eat several times a day, or there were days that they couldn't eat and days that they could eat, and he couldn't go to school regularly because of this issue as well. He did go for a semester here and a semester there, but not as a continuous thing. But he was still very interested in school, and he liked science a lot in particular, and he was getting books from the library, and he built a windmill by himself from all parts from a bike and from books from the library when he was, like, I think 12 or so, which is quite impressive. And eventually someone from an NGO noticed that, and he was awarded a scholarship to go to MIT and study there and become an engineer that he should be. And then he came back to Malawi and started projects to make things better for people that live in the villages and don't have that much money. But yeah, the book focuses mostly on when he was a child, and it's very impressive. I mean, obviously the writing of the book itself is not the best, but that's not the point. The point is the story, and the story is very inspiring. I think there is also a movie made out of it now, so that's also something you can watch. But yeah, that story in particular was quite heartwarming and quite inspiring. And for Mozambique, I have read 2 books, both by the same author. So I have read Trilogy of Mozambique and Confessions of the Lioness by Mia Couto. And I think I have a review of the second one somewhere in my channel. I will check and put it down below if I find it. Mia Couto is a white Mozambican, which it is what it is. He is one of the most regarded Mozambican authors, and he is anti-colonialist. But yeah, he's white, so his parents or grandparents are from Portugal, and that's just what I could find from Mozambique. His books, I have found that even though I agree with a lot of the sense of the book, and it's nice, I just don't connect with the characters or the story or anything. It's just, it falls very flat to me. So if you have any other very good recommendations of Mozambique, I would love to know. But yeah, so far I have read only Mia Couto, and I think he's okay. Then for Eswatini or Swaziland, I have read When the Ground is Hard by Malla Nunn, and this book is a young adult book, so it's a little bit of a different pace from the other ones, and I mean the writing is much more straightforward and simple writing than the other ones. But yeah, so this book is about a girl that is mixed race, and she goes to this mixed race school, boarding school, where all the kids kind of are mixed race, and they have like a hierarchy based on their skin color and based on the marriage status of their parents and all of that, because obviously some of them are married, but it is also fairly common, I will say, that white man comes to African countries has sex with an African woman, and then they're colored children, but the father is never in the picture because for them it was just an extramarital affair or something. So there's a lot of politics in that school with like who your parents are and who is with who and all of that. And again, coming back to what I was saying earlier, there is no apartheid in Swaziland, but there are a lot of elements from the apartheid that were taken into Swaziland, so that is something that becomes really apparent. Like the racial tensions are very, very apparent in this book as well. Anyway, this girl goes to school, the boarding school, and she used to be in the popular group of girls, but this year there is a new girl in school whose father is very rich, and so she's like the new queen of the school or something, and so this girl is relegated into sleeping with girls that whose parents are not married and blah blah blah. So she kind of goes down in the society ladder, and she has to deal with that, deal with losing her friends, and having to deal with the other people that the year prior she thought were not good enough for her, and now she kind of is part of them and all of that. And there is also some elements of like the neighboring people. So there are like an African based village, but there are also some white farmers around, and like the tensions around that. And yeah, I thought it was quite good. I mean, it is obviously not the most well-written book I've ever read, but it was good to read. Like there was nothing wrong with the writing, and it was easy to follow and easy to read, and it was it was nostalgic almost to read about, you know, girls boarding schools when you're like 15. So yeah, I enjoyed it. For Lesotho, I read Chaka by Thomas Mofolo, and this is actually a very classical book. It was written at the beginning of the 1900s, and it's about Chaka Zulu, which is like a hero of the Zulu people. And we just follow like his battles and his life, kind of. It was very military based, which is not my vibe, and the writing as well was very formal, like it used to be 100 years ago. Books that were written then, they tend to have a much more formal language, and this is no exception. So it was just probably not my cup of tea, just because of the military aspects and the language aspects of it. But yeah, still it was interesting to read a classical book from this region, because it's not very common to have such old books in African countries, just because at that time most of the African literature was oral and not written, and so having a book that was written back then, it's very interesting, I think. And for South Africa, I have read quite a few books. I think some of the big titles that I have read are Disgrace by J.M. Coetzee and The Promise by Damon Galgut. I have a review of The Promise in my channel. I didn't particularly like any of them. I think that to me, the books that I have read from white South Africans have never worked, and that doesn't mean like, oh, I don't like white South African writers, but it just, the ones I have tried several and none of them have ever worked. I think I just don't enjoy that perspective in particular. I think there are other things that I would like to learn more from South Africa that are not covered in those kind of books. Two books that I have read from South Africa that I have really, really enjoyed. Both are memoirs. The first one is Born a Crime by Trevor Noah. I would recommend the audiobook for this one because he reads himself, and apart from the fact that he's a comedian, he can also speak the languages. So he does the Tosha thing and all of those things, and I think that adds, and like the accents and everything, I think that adds a lot to the book. So I would recommend the audiobook of Born a Crime. And Trevor Noah is just such an intelligent person. He's very smart, so it's not just about his memoir. He also comments on the social cues of people and reflects on what it was to be a mixed child when it was not allowed. And I think it's a very brilliant book. And the other memoir is Long Walk to Freedom by Nelson Mandela. It's a big book, but I really recommend. I really enjoyed this. I think I learned a lot. And I didn't expect it to be so, I don't know, so honest and so enlightening. Like, Nelson Mandela is not trying to make himself look good. He just wants to reflect what it was to be him at that time in history, and to try to fight for the things that he liked and he wanted. And I think it's very valuable, and yeah, I learned a lot, and I think everyone should try and read that, even if it's a big book, because it's really worth it. Then for Madagascar, I read another non-fiction on Madagascar, a short story by Salofo Randranya. And this, again, it's a non-fiction. It was just going through different aspects, like social aspects, economic aspects of Madagascar, and also the history of Madagascar, and explaining a little bit about that. And yeah, it was a non-fiction, so it was quite dense and quite academic, but it was also very complete, I think, and I learned a lot. I think I also read it in a blog, so I will put it somewhere. But yeah, I think it was a very interesting read, I think. I just picked it up because it was one of the few things from Madagascar that I could find in my library, but yeah, I think it was very interesting. Then for Comoros, I read A Girl Called Eel by Ali Zamir, and this one is about a girl in Comoros that is very connected to the sea, and we see her growing up and all the issues in the society, and like, again, the racial tensions, but also it has a lot of the folklore of the Comoros, and it is very connected to the sea, as you would expect from an island country. And I think it was good. For some reason, I think I was not in the right place of mind to connect with it as much as I could have, but I think overall it was a good book. And then the next book I have is Kokosek by Antoine Bell, which was for Seychelles. And this one, it was just about a bunch of people trying to make a good life for themselves and struggling to do so. It's very short, and it's not quite poetry, but it's very poetic in the language. So I think it was just more about the language than about the story itself, because the story is good, but it's not like anything amazing. Anything, but yeah, it was enjoyable enough. And then for Mauritius, I read F Out of Her Ruins by Amanda Devi, which is about similar things. It's about people struggling with life and with racial tensions and all of that again. This one was very well written as well. It had very short chapters, and it kind of gave almost vignettes of these different people's life, and then came back to them, of course, but it was more fragmented like that, rather than a very coherent story, which it worked for this book because it was also very short, and it was more about the characters than about any plot point. So I thought it was quite well written, and I'm glad I read it. So yeah, those are all the books I read for the southern of Africa. I think that concludes all the African countries, and I can now move on to Asia. Let me know if you have read any of the books that I mentioned, if you have any other recommendations from any of these countries, and until next video, bye!